I frequently get asked what the best of specific product categories are. This includes capture cards. And while I usually get annoyed at this kind of question because people rarely actually want to know what the best is, this is it, sort of. The Magewell Pro Capture HDMI 4K plus LT, they really need to work on their naming schemes, is arguably the best consumer-facing capture card within the context of normal camera, video game, and PC capture options, excluding the industry-level Blackmagic, AJA, and so on cards. But that doesn't mean you should buy it. After having spent nearly an entire year with this capture card, let's talk about why.
The Mod Mic Wireless can boldly go where no mic has gone before. This microphone can attach to any headphones, requires no additional wires, features very low latency, a dual capsule microphone, 12-hour battery life, and LED indicators on the receiver so you know when you're muted and or when the battery is running low. And you can basically run your entire house without ever losing a signal. What more could you ask for? Learn more by clicking the link in the video description.
The Magewell Pro Capture HDMI, let's just call it the Magewell Amazeballs, okay? Amazeballs? This thing is a PCIe Gen 2 x 4 slot capture card. It only goes in desktops and requires a bigger slot than the 1080p era PCIe capture cards that were 1x. Most consumer motherboards don't come with 4x slots, so you'll likely need an X16 slot on your motherboard, much like with the Elgato 4K60 Pro and the AverMedia Live Gamer 4K. This specific LT model features HDMI pass-through, or loop-through, so that you can hook your video source into the input and still connect a monitor to the output. The previous model required an HDMI splitter if you needed real-time signal monitoring. Video signals are supported up to 4096 by 2160, or DCI 4K, at 60 Hz. Their video engine hardware on board is where the real magic happens. The card, on hardware, can process and handle 10-bit video, de-interlacing, cropping, adjust colors, supports hardware timestamps from certain cameras, can convert color spaces to something easier for your CPU and PCIe bandwidth to handle. It can upscale, downscale, convert aspect ratios, and more, all without negatively impacting your actual capture or encode performance on your computer. It won't encode the signal for you, but it does do most of the extra work. Unlike Blackmagic and AJA capture cards, Magewell cards auto-detect your input signal and adjust accordingly. And this one also supports HDMI 3D and HDR10, although there's not much available to actually capture the HDR signal just yet. You can email Magewell for a special SDK build that should let you capture HDR, but I didn't get around to testing this. Sorry. This card works on Windows 7 through 10, macOS 10.9 and newer, and Linux kernel versions 2.6.35 and newer. It's very low latency, it has its own heatsink and cooling fan, so you don't need to worry about overheating during extended use. Plus, the fan is quiet. It's not silent, but in the vast majority of situations, it's gonna be inaudible. In terms of usability, this thing is just great. It works with just about any software, including video chatting apps like Skype and Discord. With it, you can capture full 4K at 60 frames per second, even in 444 XRGB and 422 YUI2 color modes, or the usual 420 NV12 more compressed but less CPU heavy modes. There's a few extras too. You can do pretty much anything you want with it. It can downscale to 1080p for you without having to do it in OBS and use more CPU or GPU power. It can upscale sources from 1080p to 4K for you, things like that. It even takes all scaling modes from the open source scan converter, so you can play and capture your retro games. And I actually have a buddy, Try, from the My Life in Gaming channel, who specializes in open source scan converters and frame meisters and capturing retro video games, to talk about his use of the older model, the non-loop through model, that is otherwise almost exactly the same card.
So I bought this older non-LT model of the Pro Capture HDMI 4K Plus in 2017. It doesn't support HDR and it does not have a pass-through function, but the main thing that got me to pull the trigger on this versus other 4K capture options was that Magewell products have a really good reputation for playing nice with oddball video signals, as opposed to say Atomos or Blackmagic design products, which tend to be really strict about adhering to professional video specifications. That was super important for me because I was in desperate need of a capture card that would work well with retro consoles via the open source scan converter, or OSSC. The OSSC is an amazing device that takes analog RGB SCART, VGA, or component video input and multiplies the lines up to as much as 960p or 1200p. But the problem is that because there is no lag between the OSSC's input and output, this can result in capture card or display incompatibilities depending on the output resolution or even the peculiar refresh rates of certain classic game consoles. Now, I knew of less expensive cards that would accept the OSSC modes I needed to capture and plenty of other options for capturing 4K, but the Magewell was the only option I was aware of at the time that would do both. I did most of my Magewell capture via OBS, and other than having to remember to manually switch between full range and limited range when needed, it was quite a smooth experience. But then I learned on this show here back in the summer of 2018 about the Evermedia Live Gamer 4K, which does support HDR and also happens to be very compatible with the OSSC, and costs a lot less. There are a few fringe case OSSC modes that the Magewell is cool with, but I've struggled to get the Evermedia to recognize. But in spite of this, the Evermedia has been really convenient and works well in almost all situations, so it's become my go-to card for everything from my RGB modded NES on up to the Xbox One X. So I took the Magewell out of my main computer some months ago because, well, it was the noisiest thing in my computer, but I've kind of been thinking about putting it back in just to use as a dedicated OSSC capture card. I don't know, maybe I can even find a quieter heatsink fan solution for it. I've never really tried customizing this size of card before like that, but regardless, good card, expensive card, but extremely tolerant of just about any crazy signal that today's retro gamer might throw at it.
You can pull completely uncompressed, lossless feeds from this card, though keep in mind at 4K 60, you're looking at 3 to 5 gigabits per second for your footage or more. So you may not be able to do this due to other system specification. Or you can compress and stream within OBS or your favorite streaming program. This can also capture up to 1440p at 144 frames per second if your PCIe bus it's connected to has enough bandwidth and things like that. If you're running on low PCIe lane CPUs and thus running through the DMI and not a direct attached PCIe slot, you may run into issues here. But the card itself is capable. That's just a lot of bandwidth.
All right, so another question I've had with regards to this capture card that I didn't think to address until after I recorded the main part of this review was whether or not it actually records proper 120 FPS. So what I've done is I recorded in OBS 120 FPS footage, which OBS doesn't by default support, and you have to actually change the device to highest FPS because the driver doesn't expose a 120 FPS mode within OBS itself. But they wanted to know because they have the USB version of this capture card, the Magewell USB HDMI Capture 4K, whatever, that I reviewed last year. And whenever they do 120 FPS or high refresh rate capture, it either gets really blurry or just doesn't capture all the frames, which is not surprising because this capture card only supports up to, if I go over here, if you go to the specs, it only supports up to 144 FPS. Because it's based on bandwidth, and sending all of that data over the USB bandwidth is very intense, and so it can't keep up and it may get blurry or what have you. So I've actually done the test at 120 FPS at NV12, which is the lowest bandwidth mode you can record with the card, to see. And so I've slowed it down to 60 FPS within Premiere, so it's double the length of the actual clip. It's like setting it in slow-mo, and we're gonna count the frames to see if it is actually, if every frame is unique, therefore it's 120 FPS. In my previous testing I was doing trying to determine this, I was only getting 60 FPS captures, but that's because I was cloning my display and there was no EDID information being sent to the capture card to tell it, hey, this is 120 Hertz. So even though my main display was 120 Hertz, the capture card was still only taking in 60. And if you do install the Magewell capture program and you do send a proper pass-through or a proper EDID configured clone, that's really loud. You can see here, it does support 120 Hertz and actually 120 FPS capture in their software as well. So we're gonna sit here and see if we're actually getting 120 FPS. Wait for a good scene. All right, and so I'm just gonna advance one frame at a time, and every frame should be unique. Yep, there you can see every single frame. Every time I hit frame forward, we are getting a unique frame, whereas for 60 FPS captures, it would look like this. where every other frame, duplicate, unique, duplicate, unique, duplicate, unique. That's 60 FPS because only half the frames are unique. Whereas this has once it loads here, every individual frame being unique, even if there's a little bit of screen tearing. As far as blurriness goes, I'm not seeing any quality degradation here. I will include the clip full screen for you all, but I'm not seeing any quality degradation. So I'd say it handles 120 Hz just fine. But again, you need the EDID data, which is your display's, supported format data sent to the capture card. Man, that slow-mo looks really good too. You need that data passed through, so either you need to be using HDMI pass-through or have a tool that can confirm which modes it supports for cloning. The USB capture card specifically has its own dedicated management tool where you can add and remove supported modes. I don't know if it does EDID stuff, but this capture card does not.
Something else unique about this card is that it supports multiple video streams coming from it at once and separate processing applied to each stream. So you could send an untouched feed to OBS, a downscaled feed to Skype, a cropped feed to another program, and so on. This is more powerful with purpose-built tools or using their SDK to develop your own use cases, but it's pretty neat for it to support. Multiples of these cards in one system are also supported. The Magewell Amazeballs supports capture up to 8-channel audio streams, although your mileage may vary with actual surround sound support from game consoles, since they use actual encoded audio that it may not be able to decrypt, and getting all 8 channels to show up in something like OBS may prove difficult, but it can technically do it. This is, by far, the most flexible and capable capture card I have ever used and encountered, and I don't say that lightly. It's arguably the only capture card on the market that just completely and utterly gets out of your way and lets you focus on creating, instead of managing settings and format specifications. The only things that they can do to make it better, in my eyes, are to label the input and output HDMI ports, make a model that supports DisplayPort 1.4 with pass-through to pair with this, and to start reaching for 4K, 144Hz, and 8K, but that will be far more expensive and quite a little ways out. It's much more capable than the gaming capture card options at 4K, which sacrifice on color modes and onboard processing support, and it's far more flexible than the broadcast industry cards from the likes of AJA and Blackmagic, which freak out if you don't set the exact right format settings and are limited in what applications they can actually communicate with. But Magewell lacks the proprietary support and dedicated professional software side that the higher tier cards have, although their SDK certainly encourages development of such programs. Though it is worth noting that Magewell does have their own Capture Express capture app that you can use to capture footage for you, even in 4K, with basic controls and settings if you don't want to use OBS or Virtual Dub or things like that. So yeah, I have no problem saying all these good things about the capture card. But do you want to know the truth? The card costs $900 freaking dollars, enough to cause my light to go out while I'm recording. Nice. $900. Now you're paying for all the R&D for this awesomeness, the fact that these cards probably aren't super mass produced, which is also why they are going to want it back, and a level of hardware that just isn't possible on cheaper gaming oriented cards. Those don't support most of what this card can actually do. But for that price, you could buy 3 AverMedia Live Gamer 4K cards, or 2 Elgato 4K 60 Pros, and a Camlink 4K, and most of my normal audience would get far more use out of such setups. For normal game streamers and capture enthusiasts, those options are well more than enough. But if you need that higher tier of flexibility, or really want to capture the SNES via OSSC at 5x, or you need full 444 color RGB capture, or you really need a 10-bit workflow, despite the varying tiers of HDR support, the gaming capture cards don't actually support 10-bit, or you need a lot of capture cards in one machine, giving as little or minimal impact on system resources when scaling, deinterlacing, and other conversions are happening, or you just want the best of the best, the Pro Capture HDMI 4K Plus LT would be it. I'm genuinely curious if any of you all are planning on getting this capture card or already have it. Let's discuss in the comments below. While you're down there, I have affiliate product links where you can buy one for yourself if you're interested, or check out my other 4K capture card reviews, including a full roundup and breakdown of all currently available options. Hit the like button and subscribe for more tech education. I'm EposVox, and I will see you in the next one.